So we're going to do something slightly different in our penultimate session. We've got 2 more sessions left. The final one is a panel session, but this one we're having a slightly different format. So I'm really pleased to say we've got Thomas Christiansen here with us, who is one of our partners. So it's a partner at Net Company, which is one of our sponsors. But actually for this session, as much is going to be talking from kind of previous experience where Thomas was previously CEO for a government-owned company that did all of the kind of digital transformation work across Denmark, across the government and the public sector there. And you might not be familiar with the fact, but there was a UN e-government survey published this week that ranked Denmark as #1 in the world. So we're delighted that we've got Thomas here with us today, and he's going to talk to us all about how Denmark became the most digitally enabled nation on earth. And if there is time for any questions at the end, you might want to ask him any lessons learned for us here in the UK. So Thomas, I'm going to give the stage to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to do a little session here, and I'm going to see if I can provoke you a little bit, maybe inspire you a little bit, maybe even scare you a little bit. So why am I here? Why can I talk about this? So first of all, I spent the first 15 years of my career in the US working for big tech. Learned a lot about data, learned a lot about how you implement different things. Then I went back to Denmark, and I spent 14 years as the CEO of one of the key organizations that did a lot of the digital transformation in Denmark. So I designed a lot of the infrastructure, implemented a lot of the infrastructure, some of the key systems. I represented all the local government, which is the biggest part of the sector in Denmark. So I have a fair amount of insight into how we became #1 and how we're going to stay #1. So I'm going to try and help you become #2. So first of all, one of the things that I did early on when I was back in Denmark is I spent a lot of time traveling around talking to the politicians. What did I talk to them about? I talked to them about why the physical and the digital world really had a lot in common. And it was basically a mindset discussion. So I want you to imagine if you, in the physical world, did like you do in the digital world, allowed everybody, every organization, to make their own rules. So in our borough, we're going to have small roads. In the next borough, we're going to have big roads. We're going to have different power outlets. It would be chaos. That's basically what we do in the digital world. We allow everybody to set their own standards. And then we ask ourselves, why is it when we get this data quality sucks? We can't really use it in a global sense. And when we try to put AI on top of it, we're not really getting what we're looking for. So a lot of the discussions I've seen in the sessions today have been relatively narrow. How can we use AI to solve this problem or that problem? We're back in our silos. This is one of the things we've succeeded with in Denmark, breaking down the silos. So one of the things we've always had, and I've sat at a lot of the committees where we've done the strategies, I've sat in the steering groups for the infrastructure. One of the things we've always discussed is, what is the burning platform? Why are we doing this? If you're not very clear on the purpose, then it's very, very difficult to drive the change that's needed when you do these digital processes. In Denmark, for many, many years, it's really been budgets and the demographic development. Too many elderly, too few resources to basically deliver on the things we needed. And that was nationwide. That has driven the development of our digital footprint that we have today. Now, when I look at the development in Denmark, there are some lessons that I think are important. So first of all, we started very early. We started with emails, we started with digital signatures, so we were very, very early movers on these things. Now, some of the things that we learned was as we were doing services, and I'll show you some of these, but as we were doing services, we also needed to invest in infrastructure. Too often I see organizations build a lot of front end, but not really building enough of their back end. And where do you think all the data is really created and being used the most? It's in your back end. If you don't have that infrastructure, if you don't have an infrastructure that's flexible, you really can't attain what you're trying to do. So we've always, through all the years, built critical infrastructure. Then we have always aligned all government levels. So when we did a strategy in Denmark, I would sit at the table, I would represent all local government. There would be federal government, there would be regional government, and then we agree. This is the strategy for the next 4 years. You do this part, I do this part, and then we start using each other's components. That means we now have a complete data set and a complete view of what is going on in different areas of government. Finally, we've always worked very, very close with the private sector, both when we were acquiring these. In some countries I go to, it seems to me that some government agencies think they're IT companies. And most of them are not very good at being IT companies, to be flat out honest with you. They're good at being government. And sometimes they forget that. So in Denmark, we have been very, very strong in working with the market. They come with the business knowledge, we come with the IT knowledge, and it is in that cross that we really succeed. We also, when we do infrastructure, build it not just for public sector, we also use it in the private sector. I'll show you, I'll give you some examples of that. So when I look at Denmark, and you can sit and think about where are we at, but when I look at Denmark, we have actually arrived at the data-driven improvements. We are talking about how can we use AI on large scale to basically optimize our services. We are talking about how do we have data now that can excel the service level in certain areas of society. That's where we're at. Doesn't mean we're not working at the other end still. I work mostly on what I call digital collaboration, which I'll touch on in a second, but that's basically tying things together. So I, as a citizen, experience a service actually goes together. It's not just one silo and then throw me over in another. So here's a picture, and I just try to real quick say, when I look at Denmark, what are the absolute key components of a strong digital society? In Denmark, our portals, our digital mail, which is the most important infrastructure we have today. Our ID. We have built an infrastructure for all local government. So all of their system, all the data can flow through one common infrastructure. And then we have all our registries, and we've built a platform for distributing registry data so everybody can get access and it's standardized. These are the key components when you're running a digital society. That means you can deliver coherent services. So if we start on the ID side, this ID is the Danish ID. It's owned by Danish government. It's called Mit ID. It's actually my ID. I think in Germany they call it Bund ID, and I would be a little worried as a citizen using Bund ID. Are they tracking me? What's going on here? Over here you call it one login. Now I just hope you only have to log in once, because if you don't, that will be bad. But Mit ID works really well. We use it for the public sector and we use it for the private sector. Now we made some choices on security, for instance. We are only at security level substantial. So that means I can onboard from my couch with my phone. I only have this one ID. I use it across everything. Banks, insurance companies, even when I buy things online, I use this one ID. So I probably use it 5 or 6 times a day. This is a problem in many countries. They have an ID for government. They don't use it very often. When they need to use it, nobody can remember the password or where did I put it, and I need to start all over. Not very satisfying for citizens. So ID is very, very key. And when you talk about data, when you talk about using data, the more you can tie data to a unique ID, the better data is. The more you can do with data. So that's what we have shown in Denmark. Now, when we talk about portals, everybody in government thinks they need their own portal because they're important. They have, very, very unique things they need to talk about their citizens about. In Denmark, we've boiled it down. 4 portals covers every service you have in Denmark. We have Citizen DK, Company DK, Health DK, and of course taxation have to have their own. They really don't need it, but they have it. Citizen DK is really that's the main portal. you can really access all services through Citizen DK. It has about 2,200 services. And they're all integrated in there, so I log in one time, I can access all these services. When I go in here, I will see certain things. For instance, I will have my overview. In here, we actually show data from the case management systems we have. So we are showing our citizens, based on ID, what data do we have on you? Personal information, case information. So all that is shared. Now, we talk a lot about trust. If you want to have trust, you got to show what you have, number one. And the other thing we've learned, yes, trust is good, usability is way better. So if you want people to use something, build something that's easy to use. Now, digital post, I told you that that is the most important infrastructure we have in Denmark. So I basically get all my communication with government in one interface. I can see everything from every aspect of government. I keep it there. This is my folder where I can go back, I can find things, and I can also answer them back. It's a two-way communication. What we have also done is we are done sending PDFs. So we don't send just flat letters to people and say, you need to do this. We're sending data active documents, XML format. So I put in actions, you need to make a payment, you need to sign something, you need to apply here. Whatever you need to do, I can guide the citizen through this. So this has changed the way we design digital services now. So we're not building apps for everything. We're basically building it into these communication flows, and that becomes the glue. This is really part of the secret why we are so successful in Denmark. Now, I will say, you guys have spotted this is a good idea. So we are running POCs here in the UK and Scotland using this infrastructure. This is a key infrastructure. We also there work together with the private sector. So we have you clients where I can also get certified mail from my bank, insurance, other key elements in my life. So I can really gather everything. And that's really part of my point. If we just look at government as an isolated entity, well, how many times do you really touch government? But if you look at it as a 360, what is your interaction with government, but also other parts of society? And if you can gather that, like that folder you have at home with all your important documents, if you can have that digitally, then you have something, and then you have more interaction. So, of course, we are here, we're talking about data. When I used to travel around, when I used to meet with local government, specifically their management teams, we talked about a couple of things. One of the things we talked about was digitization. What are the processes we need to digitize? But on top of that, we talked about datafication. What are the data we need? Where do we need the data? What is the quality of our data? So one of the things we found out in Denmark is the more we start using the same systems and the same infrastructures, the higher our data quality becomes. And the easier it becomes using this data. So we today have humongous data lakes. We have many, many areas where we can use data very aggressively in the services that we're providing. Am I going backwards? I may be. So when you talk about data focus, one of the things that government really needs to start thinking about is how do I use data to optimize my operation? Well, if you need to optimize your operation, you really need to be able to see what is other parts of government doing. How successful are they doing certain services? That's what we do in Denmark. I used to send maps around in Denmark to all government to show them how they were using their systems, how successful, what was their case times, all those things. It has changed the dialogue in Denmark. I used to be sent down to the Office of Excuses for somebody to tell me why they were very, very special, and the reason that it took them, 5 months to do a casework, it was because of how special they were, or how special their citizens were. Then I started sharing data with them. Well, your neighbor government can do it, in 2 months. Oh, well, maybe I have a management problem. So we started exposing a lot of these things, we started seeing things, and this is how we have started optimizing government. And it is very data-driven. When the war in Ukraine broke out, within 3 days, I had built an interface for both federal government and local government where they could see who was coming in, were they married, all these things. We had already the data flows in place. So within 3 days, I knew, first of all, where I should put them, what was their need, school, housing, you name it. So in crisis, Denmark was one of the countries that did very, very best during the corona pandemic because we had a lot of the infrastructure in place. So just having data gives you part of the answer, but you gotta have the infrastructure to basically use the data efficiently. Today in Denmark, you can actually benchmark municipalities against each other on many key areas. Economy, schools. I can go in and I can basically measure, or I can get an answer, how much are the teachers sick in this municipality versus this one? What is the grade point average in this municipality versus this one? And how much does it cost for them to bring a student through school? In the beginning, the politicians were like completely panicking around this because what's going to happen now? But now that they understand, data actually helps them explain some of the decisions they make. We are really pouring a lot of money into the elderly area. As you can see, we are hurting on the school area. We can't have budget for everything. So we can start seeing these patterns, and over time we can really use data much more aggressively. We do, of course, also use data openly. So we do the open government data. We have several portals where we share data for private enterprise, the private sector, and we also use it aggressively for universities and other purposes. Huge data sets. So this is one of the strategies we have. We have to get this data out working. Now that we have standardized a lot of the data, we are seeing new solutions. We're seeing innovation from many small startups on the data that we produce in the government space in Denmark. So this is also a lesson. You have to use this data in the surrounding area if you really want to get the benefit out of this and not just work in silos and small areas with data. We have seen a lot of good results on this. I think that was it. We'll leave that standing. If you guys, I think we have 3 minutes and 36 seconds for questions. So.
We've got a question here. Or do you just want to shout out and I'll translate it if I can?
Okay, shout. So 2 questions. 1, how did you deal with people that didn't have digital access? And 2, I guess just a general question, when you have this when you have access to data like this that you can present in that way, in terms of like politics and public discourse, does it take, there are always arguments over statistics, does it help in that sense if you can say this is the version of the truth?
Great. The first bit of that question, if you didn't hear, was how did you deal with people that didn't have digital access, so the digital divide question?
So one of the things that happened in Denmark while we were going through this financial crisis 10, 15 years ago was the government says, listen, if we're going to save money, we have to close channels. So we can't have a massive analog channel and a massive digital channel. That sounds more like double cost. So they made it mandatory, first for companies, then for citizens. It is today mandatory for all Danish citizens to have a digital ID, use digital post, and so on. So it's mandatory. So we have moved it. But you can get exempt. So you can get exempt. There's a small percentage that are still exempt, and they still get paper versions. So we basically, if you will, very hard drove this development basically to ensure we get that. But it also puts a lot of pressure on you as government to provide very, very usable solutions. Trust me, when it's mandatory, they will complain and they will come standing down at your door knocking going, this doesn't work. So it has forced us into thinking very user and citizen oriented. As far as the data, in certain areas, even when I showed you the benchmark data, I spent probably 5 years discussing with the politicians whether we should share this. They were very, very worried about it. I also spent a number of years discussing with them, should we share the data we have in our case systems with the citizens. Well, they're going to call us every day. They're going to have a lot of questions. The opposite has happened. Less calls. Once you get the call, more qualified. We're actually looking at the same data set. I'm just asking you, why are you showing data like this? So that has been, and on the political side, it took a while, but once you start having a digital mindset, you do know that data can be used both to, I was going to say, be a defensive type of tool, but it can also be an offensive type of tool. So Copenhagen, for instance, I could show you data on that, but Copenhagen says we want to be a green city. Well, I can go in and I can see exactly, and they are, I think, number 8 on their investment on a green profile. So, they can see their investments are actually putting them very high when we benchmark them on these parameters. So once the politicians kind of understood how this could be used and also measure when they put in certain things they want to change and can see the effect, then it really has a very, very strong effect in the way you use it.
We've got lots of questions. We've got 1, 2, 3 questions down here. Man in the red shirt, lady with the green cardigan, and then gentleman over there. Thanks.
Hi, thanks for that. Chris Allen from the Government Office of Tech Transfer. So what has been the impact on democracy? I can imagine that there must be some benefits, maybe disbenefits in that space as well.
Yeah, so it's a funny thing, and I think I got a lot of pushback in the beginning, because I would get on stage like this and I would tell, the politicians, I said, listen, digitization really is not a democratic sport. It's a team sport, and there's a coach, and that's me. And I'm going to tell you where we're going to go and how we're going to do it. But what we do from what we create is going to really create a much better foundation for democracy. So having access to all this data, see how our decisions basically are being put into life, how they're affecting the things we are doing. So I think you need to separate it. Building these type of infrastructures require, like when you're building roads and bridges, you don't take it out for a vote. Not everybody has a say in that. So building those type of things, but then using the outcome of your digital investment to support democracy, I think, is probably the best answer I can give you.
Thanks. So we got the lady with the,
Okay. Carolyn Falami from the National Crime Agency. I'm curious by something you said with regards to mandating your citizens to hop onto the digital kind of path. I'm curious as to, did you, not you personally, but was there any work done to upskill citizens prior to this mandatory kind of direction? And if so, when did that start? What did that look like?
No, and we could do a whole session on that, because that was a lesson there, let me tell you. No, most of our citizens knew 2 years ahead it's going to become mandatory, and most of them are actually pretty digital ready and stepped into it. But the latest strategy we made has a huge area of digital inclusion. And what we have found is we have 2 segments of society that are struggling. We have our young generation, if you will, not because they don't know technology, they're actually pretty good at it, but we are miserable communicating as government. We still write like we did 50 years ago. My daughter will call me and go, I got a letter. It's like in Chinese. No, it's from government, and I'll translate it for you. So we're struggling there. The other thing is the elderly population. They're struggling with technology. So we are doing a lot on digital inclusion, so I can get consent from my parents. I can help them, do some of these things. You can get exempt if you really cannot and get help. We have citizen centers now that are helping citizens. So that is one advice I would give all of you when you do digital. You have to have a channel strategy for digital inclusion. How are you going to include the portion of your society that will struggle? And you will probably see the same in the UK. About 20% of your population will struggle somehow with this.
And then I think we've got another question there. Thanks.
Hi, David Ross from the Treasury, so you can probably predict what I'm going to ask, but have you got anything to say about how much this will cost? And then do you have anything, any observations on how you might scale this from like the handfuls of millions to the tens of millions to the hundreds of millions in terms of citizens?
So when you look at your investment and your return on investment here, I mean, we did this to save money. Let me be honest. That was the main driver for many of these things we did. And we have saved massively on doing things like this, both on the resource side, but also when we talk about time. The fact that we can process cases much quicker now is a tremendous savings. What we started doing, and I arrived from the US and I talked to them about a business case. They looked at me, a business case. We're government, we don't talk about business cases. So, okay, I said, so we talk about a value case. So we always look 360 to say, okay, when we do these things, what is the value case for the citizen, for the government, for your other stakeholders that are around? And we did throw things out because the value case was simply too small in certain areas and the investment were too large. So we do that, and I'll tell you some of the things I showed you, like, you know, the digital post, that pays for itself every single year just on postage. Just on postage. Now, the other business cases related to shortening down time, being much more efficient, aligning data, all those things are just on top. So there are tremendous savings associated with this, if that's your burning platform.
Do we have any? Oh, yeah, we've got one final. I think that will be the two. We'll take these two final questions and then. Thanks, Thomas, for taking so many questions. There we go.
Emily Barrington from the Office for Stats Regulation. So I'm curious about the back end, because we can see the front end, but like, what's the back end look like, and how's the data stored, and are there like privacy enhancing technologies, and how do you ensure that there's kind of privacy in that?
It's a very good question. So the way we have designed the back end is obviously we try and be as standardized as we can. We try and reuse. The other thing we do is we keep data locally. So we keep data in the case management system, and then we have what we call thin infrastructure on top, which is kind of like a roadmap. So when I call up a view of a citizen, I go pull data from all the right places, and I pull it up, and I have my view. So that's how we have designed it. And then, you know, when I talked about the infrastructures we talk about here, it is mandatory to use those infrastructures. You cannot, as a government agency, say, no, I got my own, we baked our own infrastructure down in our basement, we're going to use that. No. Even taxation have been forced to use this infrastructure, which is unbelievably unusual. So it has been driven, and of course over time, you update your infrastructure. You become better, modernizing, get more, if you will, data-driven in your infrastructure and how you set it up and so on. So yeah, we still work on that. I mean, infrastructure is something that you have to maintain, and you keep building new components that you can use across government in these different areas. So yeah, we are very aware of how we design, and we have done it in partnership with the vendors. So today I am with Netcompany. Well, Netcompany has powered a lot of these things, and these are the platforms that are now being used elsewhere in Europe. They're tested, they're designed together with government, and so that to me is what we need to be doing more of. Let's share what we are doing, let's reuse, and let's copy what works.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think we're going to give Thomas a bit of a break. You are joining us for our final session as well, Thomas. But please give Thomas a round of applause. So much there.